Grave robbing has walked hand in hand with our fear of death for hundreds of years. The desecration of our loved ones has remained stuck in our minds. In early England, grave robbing became a common and feared practice. Respecting the dead and allowing the dead to have their peace was a rather intense priority in the past. In modern media, we see grave robbing in a more comedic light, with it being a source of awkward elevator humor or grueling task of sarcastic wit. Modern shows like Supernatural portray the digging up of graves as a task meant for good rather than that to be considered evil. It is a source of humor more than a task as the show continued. But where did grave robbing start and how exactly did it change? In the history of England, body snatching begins with the introduction of the human cadaver. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the practice was forbidden by the church and abandoned in favor of animal dissection and accompanied by the study of ancient texts. The first recorded dissection in Western Europe was performed in around 1300 at Bologna University, in which 4 students were arrested for grave robbing. The problem here during this century, the 18th and 19th century, was that for a surgeon to become a full surgeon, they needed to attend 2 full courses of anatomy with dissection in London. The result was a spiraling demand for anatomical material, for which, even in the 18th century in Britain, the supply of convicted murderers was insufficient. Those who obtained the corpses were those of the medical education, included the medical students themselves, middlemen who were paid by the church, undertakers for cadavers, con artists who claimed the bodies of the poor, amateurs who stumbled upon them, and actual grave robbers and murderers. This seemed like a fairly new practice. However, it is shown that in medieval and Renaissance Europe, students of medicine and art were reported to have stolen corpses, this including Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, although they were more considered body snatching rather than grave robbing. Only corpses of executed criminals were given to surgeons who had no other subjects for their anatomical dissections. Society forbade dissections, and on one hand, yet expected the physicians to know where the appendix was. Related to body snatching was murder for the purpose of obtaining bodies to sell to medical schools. A person murdered for this purpose was said to have been burked, after William Burke, an Irish cobbler who was hanged and dissected in 1829 for his role in murdering and selling the bodies of 16 people in Edinburgh. The people who stole bodies for a profession, giving them to medical students, were called resurrectionists, and customarily it became incredibly difficult for them to get these bodies, as people during that time decided that they wanted to try to make sure to avoid this by having armed guards and creating cages and such and high fenced walls to make sure their bodies couldn't be stolen. However, even without these, it was very difficult for the resurrectionists to get the bodies, considering that not only did they have to make sure that they didn't get any of their possessions, because it was at the time incredibly illegal for them to take the possessions rather than just the body, but they also had to make sure they got it quick enough that the body was not rotting, as embalming was not a thing at the time. Contrary to popular belief, depictions of body snatching rarely dug up the entire coffin and instead dug a vertical tunnel down, broke the part of the coffin, and tied a rope around the neck and pulled them out through there. And they typically and customarily brought the bodies to the medical places naked. To try and contain the escalating situation, in 1832, the Anatomy Act was passed in the United Kingdom, making body snatching a criminal offense. However, it was the customary new invention of embalming, in which was a regular use for the 1980s, that typically stopped the body snatching epidemic.